We're talking to Jack Koten. Jack's a retired Senior Vice President, Public Relations of the Ameritech Company, which was absorbed into what became SBC, which is now, if you haven't seen the TV commercials, is now AT&T. Jack and I shared an experience 25 years ago when the AT&T and the Justice Department of the United States settled an antitrust suit that effectively broke up the Bell telephone system, and which is where Ameritech came from. It was the Midwest piece of that breakup. And I wanted to talk to Jack about, my recollections of that were from the AT&T point of view, where we were, in effect, had devised the announcement plan, but Jack was in the telephone business side of it, and it would be interesting to me, and I hope to everybody else, to get his recollections and whatever lessons he may remember from that, because AT&T was sort of the top of the pyramid. It was the holding company that owned all of the Bell telephone companies. But the fact of the matter, the employees, for the most part, 1 million of them, were mainly employees of the telephone companies, and the customers were customers of the Bell telephone companies, not AT&T. So Jack saw that event, to put it politely, unfold from a different perspective than I did. And Jack, talk to us about that. What happened?
Well, I would tell you it's a very good question, and actually came somewhat as a shock to us, even though the trial had gone along, or the negotiations had gone along for some time. But when the word was finally released that the breakup of the Bell system was going to actually take place on January 1st of 1984, it really came as a shock, I think, to employees, and particularly to employees in the operating companies. The company I was involved with at the time was Illinois Bell, which was designated to be one of the 5 Bell companies which were going to become part of the Midwestern company. There were 7 companies, operating companies, that were created from what became NYNEX in the east, Bell South in the south, Southwestern Bell, U.S. West, and Pacific Tel, but we were located in the heartland, and our company was composed of the operating companies in Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. And I would say that the very first sense, besides the shock of it, was a sense of divorce, like there was an enormous divorce in the family. I mean, we could not believe that something like this was going to happen. AT&T had been providing cover for us for years. We felt very much a part of the Bell system and part of the Bell family. In fact, the entire Bell system was regarded by most of the 1 million employees that you cited as a large family. We were all dedicated to providing service to our customers, to meeting their needs, and to doing community service type things, and it was an extraordinary work experience. So the fact that this company was going to be severed from AT&T was, at the outset, was quite a shock, and employees were, I would say, at the outset, sort of dazed. They were disappointed. They were mad at the government. They were mad at the FCC. They were mad at the Justice Department, and mad most at AT&T for allowing such a thing. How could this actually happen? I mean, who in their right mind would break up the world's largest company, even though it was a monopoly, but a company that people liked, that provided good service, at low rates? It just seemed incomprehensible to those of us who were on the street, so to speak, and working out in the heartland. So when we recovered from that, then the question became, well, what do we do about it?
What do we do now?
Right. And the thing that really took place was all of a sudden this creation of a will to, by God, if we were going to be separated from the Bell system, that we were going to become the best of the operating companies and provide the best service and try to have the best relations that we could have with customers and the commissions. Well, that bit of bravado was much easier said than done, because one of the first things that I wound up having the responsibility for was picking out a name for the new company. And that I created, of course, as one always does, a small committee made up of representatives of the 5 companies and a few other people. And we hired our ad agency and then consultants to help us with this project. And of course, everybody had a different idea about what our name should be. And the key thing that became important to us, we had been Illinois Bell Company, there had been Wisconsin Bell, Michigan Bell, Indiana Bell, Ohio Bell. Would we keep the name Bell as part of our new name? That became, which we were entitled to do, and some of the companies did. But in our situation, that became, not only was it controversial, but it was decided that we were going to be separated. We didn't want to have anything to do with what had gone on in the past. So we were going to become a separate entity, and that we were going to show the others how we could make this work and work to our advantage. So there were those who held out for being Midwest Bell. Some, of course, wanted to keep the Bell name, called Midwest Bell, Great Lakes Bell. There were different combinations of names that were actually brought forth and suggested to us. But one of the things that we kind of immediately, we started doing research on what names would be most acceptable and forward-looking, because we wanted to be a forward-looking company. And our research showed us that the words that signified in the telecommunications industry progress and future and being innovated, words like information and technologies led the way. So we decided if we could create a name that had information and technologies in it, that would be to our advantage. And then looking at the lineup of companies, one of the few suggestions that I made that seemed to get universal approval immediately was that we ought to have the word American be our first, because if we were American, we would be the first in the alphabetical order of all the companies, including AT&T, if they chose to continue to be American Telephone and Telegraph Company. So in short order, we adopted the name of American Information Technologies Company, and that became our name. The trick then became, if that's the name, where all does that have to appear? Stock certificates, for example. We were going to have entirely a new stock issue, and so all of our certificates had to be printed and made, and we had to use the name. And what do we pick as a symbol to put on the certificate? Because every certificate has a 3-dimensional image, so to speak. And after much discussion, we decided to use the god Mercury, and we'd use that. Well, there was controversy because Mercury was, and we're in the Midwest, of course, Mercury was always half nude, and that bothered some of the people that we had.
Also slippery.
Very slippery, but nevertheless, that all turned out okay, and we decided, well, what color do you want the stock certificates printed? Well, you could have them brown or red or whatever. And of course, our treasurer immediately said, well, they have to be printed in green because green signifies money. So anyway, that's one of those things that happened in that area. But that just was one of the byproduct type of things that happened. Immediately, we needed to develop an advertising and branding type campaign that suggested that we now no longer were Illinois Bell and Ohio Bell, et cetera, that we were American Information Technologies. Our stock ticker symbol was going to be AIT, and that became very popular immediately, and we started using that in some of the employee information. But the trick was to begin to tell our employees that we were still in the business of providing customer service. We still were regulated by the state commissions, only now that we had the FCC also providing oversight. Our playground shifted from just being Illinois or Indiana or Michigan now to Washington, so we had a much bigger arena that we had to adapt to and adapt to. And my boss suggested that in addition now to worrying about what was going on in Springfield, which had been my main government relations thing, that I ought to start beginning to worry about what was going on in Washington as well, because we needed to have a Washington office. So as a result, our lives began to change dramatically. But the key thing was our employees. Employees were the most reluctant to give up the past and enter the future. There were the ones that wanted to, yeah, let's go out and really show them that we can do this. But more and more, there was, talk about the good old days when we were part of the Bell system and we were part of Ma Bell and all of that. And there was some sense that when we started to repaint the trucks with Illinois Bell and having the Bell symbol on it, with Ameritech as the name, that there were people that were not enthusiastic about that. One of the things that I wound up having to do was come up with a graphic design for how we were going to display the name Ameritech, and then that meant choosing the colors. We had a superior, Ladislav Suttner was a graphic designer internationally known, came up with a beautiful logo and forward-looking symbol, which we put on the stock certificate and used in our advertising and all that. But the color that we chose to use was brown. And we picked brown because it was distinctive, a distinctive color. Everybody else had been used to Bell System blue or some combination of that, and so we wanted to be different. So we had brown, and there were people in the officer group that questioned me on why would we ever want to use a color like brown, and I had to suggest to them that there were thousands of trucks running around the country with brown UPS, and that it wasn't that we were introducing brown as a color. And I also reminded that most people's favorite sweetness was chocolate, and chocolate was brown, and so that we would be in good company. Now, I have to admit, those were sort of limp reasons for doing that, but in the final analysis, it began to take, and the people began to accept that as being, this is who we are.
Transfer their allegiance.
Right.
But I'm going to take you back to the human part of it, the breakup, because this is a story I don't know. A couple of things happened. First of all, they're no longer Bell System employees. They must have wondered, where did my pension go? Was the kind of thing that might have come up, I don't know. Also, in the terms of the breakup, there was one stinker business, as you may recall, which was who sells or leases the telephones, because there was a dead last loser. You could not make money, and in their wisdom, the Justice Department and the judge decided that was AT&T's business. Right. So you had many employees who were installers or did repair work, so on and so forth. They were in limbo. They weren't going to work for you anymore. They had to become AT&T employees or do something else. And of course, you had customers. I remember where I was, one of the television journalists entrapped me in an interview on the air by handing me 3 telephones, which he had disconnected from his apartment, he said, and handed them back to me and said, now what do I do? So what happened to the customers and the employees in that, it was a cultural shock for all of them, at least those who cared.
Well, it was a big cultural shock for the customers about and confusion about the telephone instrument itself and the connection. And we did our best with what I would call customer information pieces that were direct mail. We used advertising. We used letters directly to customers, trying to explain the difference. But I have to admit that the job was long and arduous to get people to really understand that we provided the service up to a certain point, and then the inside wiring was either on their own or that we would do it for a special fee. It was no longer where the phone instrument was, whatever instrument they might have, back to the central office, that had been separated. And that was a point of great dissatisfaction as far as customers were concerned. Customers were confused about who to call, for what, for whether it was repair service, and if it was repair, they'd be asked, well, where is it? You know, I don't know where my phone is. The phone's dead. You know, I don't know whether it's outside or inside or what, you know. And that was, I'd say, as hard as we tried in all the states to overcome that, that experience ultimately turned out to be the best teacher as far as customers. After you've had a few run-ins here and there, that is a bit of a problem. The fact that customers got 2 bills now instead of 1 bill because long-distance services were provided by a different supplier. All of that is made time and time again. When you go to a party or a meeting or whatever, it says the breakup of the bill system is the stupidest thing that the government has ever done. And then why did you let it happen? It was always our fault. It was like something that, gee, you know, we just said, oh yeah, go ahead, break us up, we don't care anything. And time again, that required, you know, kind of patience and being calm, relatively speaking, to respond to some people who were quite irate. In the meantime, the employees, particularly the contact employees, whether they were the service reps in the business office, they had to deal with the customers just like the installers and repairmen who went out. And we equipped all of them with little, what I was going to call cheat sheets, but I don't, that's a wrong term to use here, but with information pieces,
points
which
give
the points, we call them
yeah,
key talking points about how to respond to these questions. And I would say that the majority of employees handled that pretty well, but as you well know, not all employees are gifted with the ability to respond to people, particularly irate customers. If the customer was friendly and nice in one way, usually that went pretty well. But if the employee was met head on, either over the phone or face to face, those situations cause concern for us. We had a halo effect immediately after the breakup in '84 and '85, where we had the Ma Bell influence carried over, which we benefited from, and then as customer experience multiplied, customer attitudes towards the service we were providing dropped. And all of that then required a regeneration of ability. And of course, in our company, as you well know, in the Bell system, the public relations departments handled the customer information job. They were responsible for the advertising and for the directory introductory pages. Everything that was explained to customers as well as employees funneled through our department. And I would have to say that our public relations people in the departments understood this. They were willing to give of their time and energy and work extraordinary amounts of time to try to fix these things, but it was so pervasive that it just never seemed to go away. Our advertising agencies and the firms that we hired to help us with the customer information, they all worked diligently, but it was a time factor that finally began to work in our advantage. When we would go to meet with state legislatures or and meet with the Congress, I remember meeting with representatives of various delegations in Washington of our congressmen, and they're there in Washington. They had every opportunity to put their finger in the dike, but do we see much finger in the dike sort of thing? Yeah, they're down there saying, I'm getting nothing but complaints back in my district about what you're doing. Like, we should have actually tried to do something about it. And the fact is that it was a long pull. Now, from your perspective, you're dealing with a whole different scene, but we felt that we were we were in the field. we were in the front lines, and the best thing that we could do is try to do our very best and not let the negative publicity that we got or comments, whether it was on television or whatever, really begin to get us down. And slowly that all began to turn around. I'd like to say that it was directly because of our efforts, but it really was because of the efforts of really about 100,000 employees. Like when we were created, we were the 30th largest company. I mean, nobody really appreciated how big AT&T was. We came out as the 30th largest company in the United States. And there were a lot of customers, a lot of employees involved.
One of the things, before we go to the next question, I just wanted to chip in and thank you, because this is stuff that I was not happily involved in. But the judge gave us 18 months from the time we agreed to the settlement in order to actually operate separately. So you had your employees and our own in limbo, not the whole 18 months, but a lot of the part of the time. Many didn't know which side of the dividing line they were going to land on, or were they going to go to work for AT&T? Did they stay with Ma Bell? They had angry customers. They were angry. And I think what probably did pull the whole outfit through all of us is that I used to say that the old Ma Bell was 1/3 business, 1/3 family, and 1/3 religion. And it was a terrible shock, but I believe that attitude that service is our business. Many customers might not necessarily believe that every day, but service was our business, and so we're going to get through this mess and come out the other side. And the other thing is that it's a high irony in terms of how government works in a democracy, because it was 25 years ago, more or less, that this happened. And the whole darn thing has been put back together with the consent of the same Justice Department. So several 100,000 employees went on the Bataan Death March. Several tens of thousands of them lost their jobs and their careers altogether.
Well, as you
unknown amounts of marketing money was spent, as you just described, to explain we're Ameritech and we're here to serve you. And it wasn't very long that you're AT&T again. So I try not to dwell on that, but I think you all did a really marvelous job of, I think people who may be watching this someday will not recognize what a culture shock it was and what a difficult human problem it is, not a management problem in that sense or a technical problem, but a human problem to break apart a company over, I mean, literally, you close business on Friday afternoon and you open Monday morning as a different company doing different kinds of things and different from what you had been doing before. And so I think to me, the lesson, or one of the lessons, is that that management may really think it's very, very smart, but if you want to turn a business around, you want to move it in another direction, it starts with your employees. If they decide to go where you want to go, you get there. And if management decides and they don't want to get there, it isn't going to work.
No, it's very true. It's the employee on the street, the employee that the customer comes in contact with, that makes your reputation one way or the other. A person's attitude, a customer's attitude, is shaped by the personal contact they have with either an employee performing their job or an employee who may be off the job in a social setting. Included in that group is retired employees. And just to put a little footnote on that, retired employees, everybody who is retired just accepted the fact that they had retired from the old Bell system. The reality of it wasn't very long before their pension check or their benefits were coming from their new company, and there was always some uncertainty about that aspect of it.
You mentioned one thing I will talk about, but you will understand because we were in this together. The old Ma Bell was probably the first corporation that ever did comprehensive consumer public opinion studies. And from the time that those studies were undertaken, which was before you and I worked for the company, up until the last day, the one thing that affected a customer attitude to the company was the last contact with an employee. And it has always boggled my mind that that data never changed for more than 50 years, and yet how many companies operate as though what the employee did on the last contact with the customer made any difference. You know, it can't be overcome with advertising. It can't be overcome with anything else. If the employee is surly, if they screw up, if they don't know how to do the job, that affects how the customer feels about the whole darn company.
That contact also, or that experience, lasts for a long time. It doesn't go away. That personal contact. You can see something in the newspaper or magazine or see it on television, and it'll come and go out of your mind fairly quickly. But a contact that you've had with an employee that was disagreeable will shape your opinion about whether you really want to continue to do business with that organization. And as you said, why all businesses that provide service to customers don't recognize that is just an absolutely amazing type
fact. And of course, the flip of it is that the best way to hate a company based on your last contact is when you can't talk to them. You get a menu that finally gets around to saying the estimated time of your wait is 35 minutes. Now, if you think that doesn't sort of permanently ruin your image, anyway, let's go on.
What it does is it provides that there's great opportunities for people in the general customer information, public relations world, or whatever, in that contact. There are great opportunities for improvement.
Simple.
Simple. And if you talk about vocations that will eventually pay off for companies, because treating the customer right is going to make the difference for profitability standpoint and general internal relations as well.
Amazing insight.
Yeah, I hate to share that with you at this moment.
Let's go to a positive story now. You were the one person who saw the potential, the opportunity for the Arthur W. Page Society. I believe you were the second president of the Page Society. Tell me or tell us, because again, I was not personally much connected to that. Tell us, how the Arthur Page Society came into being as we know it today. What prompted you to persistently demand a change in the purpose of the organization, and what was in your mind? What did you foresee? Because your idea at least created clearly the #1 membership organization in the field of public relations.
Well, you've asked a very broad question, and I have to say that you were really the inspiration for the organization being created to begin with, because one of the last acts before the breakup of the Bell system was that each of the major organizations within the Bell system got together for meetings with all of their top managers. And Ed, as being the head of public relations for AT&T, brought the 25 of us who were officers of the various operating companies of the AT&T together for a final dinner with our wives, and it was held at the Tavern on the Green in Central Park in New York City, and it was actually a delightful, wonderful evening. Everything done in first class. The situation could not have been warmer or more conducive, even though we all knew that we were ready to die, go off the reservation. And during the course of that evening, you made comments to the effect that you gave a kind of a nice talk about the fact that here assembled in this group were not only the most talented group of public relations people professionally in the country, collected all in one room, but also that over the years, because of the interaction that we'd all had together, working together on various things, that we were really like a band of brothers. And that terminology, which was borrowed from the book and then later used by the movie, really symbolized and characterized exactly, I think, how most of us felt that we were part of an organization. So at that particular session, one of our members, actually Irv Zimmerman from Bella, Pennsylvania, where we're located now, suggested that why don't we all get together next year and have a meeting to commemorate this, and we'll all be together and see how everybody's doing. And he volunteered to host that meeting in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and various other people said, well, why don't we create an organization? And Irv volunteered to say if we couldn't incorporate it so that we'd have some kind of a legal entity which would make it possible for us to get together. Well, a year went by, and actually Irv did all the things that he said he was going to do. He and his wife filed for incorporation papers in the state of Pennsylvania for the Arthur W. Page Society. And we had a meeting in Hershey, which everybody who had worked for you, either directly or indirectly, all appeared. At that meeting, there was a nominating committee composed of Bob Anger, who was, I think, the chair, and Frank Kane and Marilyn Laurie. I missed the opening evening's activities, and when I walked in the morning the next day, Bob Anger came up to me and told me that we had a meeting last night of the nominating committee, and we've decided that we want to elect you as the president of the new Page Society, and that your term would be for 2 years, and you don't have to worry because your vice president is going to be Jean Hanley, who represented the Southern New England Telephone Company, and she'll take it after that for 2 years, so it won't be really much of a job for you. And we have, he said, Bob, I'm going to be the treasurer, and Frank Kane was going to be the secretary. Everything's all set. Is that okay with you? Well, you made it sound so simple that, it was very hard to just say, no, that's not, I don't want to do that. I can't do that. But so I agreed to do that. And so in reality, at that meeting, there was a formal business meeting convened by Irv Zimmerman, at which I was elected as the first president of the Page Society. Irv had been the convener and the host and all that, but he never ever held the title per se of being president. So that's how I, inherited that job. Well, the fact is that everybody said, "Oh, great, it's applaud, this is duck soup." And Herb came up to me and he said, "Well, the main hallmark of all of our sessions that we always have a big golf outing, so you got to plan next year's meeting, wherever it's going to be, at a place where we'll be able to play golf and there'll be tennis facilities and all that. And then the rest of it, we'll just have a good time. Be sure to have a good reception, cocktail party, and all that sort of thing." Well, when I got back to Chicago, I literally had to begin to think about this. And fortunately, at the meeting at the Tavern of Green, the name Arthur Page had been decided upon because he was the patron saint of all of us who worked in the Bell system and held these offices. And we'd all heard about Page, knew about Page. Most of us had never met him or laid eyes on him, but he seemed like the perfect symbol because all of us were influenced by his teachings. And it just seemed like a good idea that we would carry on as a group in his name. Well, it seemed to me in reflection right away that this was a great idea, but basically all it was going to be would be an alumni group, and an alumni group with a limited life, because eventually as people began to die, which unfortunately is all of our fates, that the group would get smaller and smaller and smaller, and that what's the point of doing all of this, because there'll be people retiring and leaving and that sort of thing. So I convened a small group of my staff, which John McDermott was part of, who you know, and Steve Hines and Sue Burrows, and I said, I was elected to be president of this organization. What should we do? And
what is it?
Yeah, and they all asked me, of course, right away, well, who's Arthur Page, you know, which was always one of those tricky questions that you have to answer. But out of that session, John came up with the idea, well, we need to have some kind of a newsletter type thing to be able to send to people. And Steve said, well, anything I can do to help you? And Sue said, well, I'll be happy to write the newsletter. What would we put in and what would we do? Well, make a long story short, we decided that that's what we would do, and that we ourselves would try to fund what the cost of that would be. I called Bob Anger. I may have called you too, and I said, you know, we can't really do this thing and be paying all these expenses. He said, well, why don't we have dues? Bob said, why don't we have dues? $500, every company puts in $500, and then everybody who works for the same company will have individual membership dues of $100. So he said, that way you'll have some money, and he said, I'll take care of raising the money for it. So I said, that's a great idea, so I told our folks to go ahead. But then when we started to think about it, that we said that in order to perpetuate this, Page stood for some wonderful things, and what he had brought to the public relations profession was unique, and he brought honor and distinction, and that if we could do anything positive, that we could honor Page by trying to disseminate what his teaching was to other individuals and other organizations, because as far as we could tell, that the Bell system had been really successful because of what he had brought to AT&T. So again, to make a longer story short, we decided that what we would try to do was create the best possible organization that had the highest standards, like we had enjoyed when we were all part of the Bell system together, and that if we were going to have a meeting someplace, it would be in a quality place, just like that where we'd been accustomed to meeting. If we were going to put out a newsletter or have any kind of communication, it would be the best that we'd have, that we would have our own logo designed, we'd have a distinctive image that would feature Arthur Page's image on it, we'd have our own distinctive color, which turned out to be bronze, and all of that started to come together. Then came the thing was that we still had this box that we had of just having Bell System people in it, and we said there's no life or future beyond this if we can't expand and reach out into the general corporate world for people. At that point, I think we had a meeting, a board meeting. We got together and we reaffirmed the idea that the only people that we wanted as members basically were corporate people who were peers of ours who held jobs that was similar to ours. That we felt that it would be useful to have an academic or two in the organization to give us the academic perspective. And then we also felt at the time that suppliers of ours who were the heads of their firms would also be welcome. So with your help, we got Lou Banks from the Sloan School at MIT to come on the board to represent the academics. Lou Harris, who was probably the best known and best able pollster of that time and probably still is for many reasons, agreed to come on board again with your influence. We had the NWR ad agency agreed to come and participate as part of this. And then Gene Stevenson, who worked at United Carbide was the first person who was a non-Bell person who became a member. Shortly thereafter, Jim Murphy, who worked at Beatrice at the time, just before he went to Merrill Lynch, came on the board, and we started to reach out and grow. And I think you were one of the major recruiters we had of people who were non-Bell people. Eventually, I say that because we're doing this under the auspices of the Page Center here at Penn State. In about the second or third year, invited Larry Foster to join the board, and he was more than willing and has been a dynamic member of the organization ever since. Jean Handley succeeded me as president for a 2-year term, and after her was Jerry Blatherwick, who was the vice president or executive vice president down at Southwestern Bell. And after that, Larry became the first president who was a non-Bell person. But the whole idea was to keep it as an organization of peers, that no seconds were to be members of the organization, that we wanted a group of people who were comfortable talking to each other, who were used to dealing with similar types of problems, who had access to resources. I mean, that if we needed funding for a project that we could call on someone to do that. Shortly thereafter, after Jerry ceased being president, we moved to Larry. We decided that we needed help, and you were generous in providing space for us at AT&T, so we had an office. Maureen Schaefer came on board, and all of a sudden, all of the telephone and communication supplies, office equipment, and that you provided. And with that as a basis, the Page Society got off and got running. But keeping the ideals at the highest level was the key element of all that, and we had to say no a lot of times when people wanted to try to do something else.
You know, one thing that leads me into another related subject is that yes, Larry Foster, certainly his credibility and his the respect that people in that peer group had for him made it possible to recruit the kinds of members we wanted. But I think kind of under the skin of that was the fact that even for people that didn't know very much about Arthur Page, people from other businesses, after all, he was dead for a number of years by then, clearly this is a group of public relations executives that are different from what the world may think in a very important way, because Page was the prototype, which is they were not communicators, although Page himself certainly was a good writer and communicator. He was a former journalist. But he was an advisor to management. He was a counselor. And that's the essence, for most of us, the essence of what a chief public relations officer does. And I think you were wise to see that opportunity, but I think one reason it caught on is that there is no other organization like that has a mission, which is to promote the legacy of Page and the ideas that Page installed, but also to bring back the notion of I think the word counselor is sort of pretentious, but in the senior management of a company, as well as in the nonprofit arena, you really do need someone who is paid to worry about the policies that the business adopts, the way it carries out the policies, its reputation, and that leads to integrity and a whole bunch of other things. So one subject,
let me stop you just for a minute right there, because one of the things that you've touched on, which is distinctive about the people who have positions that you and I have held, can be go back to the origins of the Page Society, that this is the counseling and advising role. And throughout, the early days of it, your own advice and counsel and support for what we were trying to do made a difference. And that is a hard thing to describe to people, because whenever we needed to know, kind of why are we here and what are we for, you were able to provide that kind of answer and support for us, which we were able to communicate to others and prospective members or people who we wanted to join. Now the same thing, and this is what gets me, what you triggered, is that that's basically the role that we hope to have and achieve with not only our members, but for that American business can use people who have this capacity and this ability to do that very thing. At this point, it's beyond, like things that we expect in new employees or people who have their ability to communicate, to be good writers, to be good persuaders of things, to be energetic and to know what's going on around them and be perceptive. You reach a certain point where those kind of talents and abilities are just expected as you move up the corporate ladder, so to speak. When you get to that senior level, your ability to write and communicate and think and that sort of thing is sort of expected. But it's what you have to offer, the advice and counsel that you have to offer when the corporation is confronted with a problem, or the CEO is confronted with a problem, is what makes the difference. And that's basically what the Page Society is trying to do. And I have to say that's what Page is, why he's such a perfect role model for all of us to have, in which I think that we've been blessed by being able to extend it through the Page Society into the world today. And you're putting your finger on the exact key for what a lot of American businesses need.
While you're thinking about the answer to the next question, which is not only what the heck is counseling, but how do you do it, I wanted to offer a Page quote, or at least a paraphrase in one of his speeches to a, I don't know whether it was a Bell audience or a mixed, a corporate or business audience, but he was trying to explain what this counselor does, what this chief public relations officer is supposed to be doing. And so he used a metaphor. He said that job is like the officer that stands on the bridge of a very large ship, stands next to the captain who is commanding the ship and running the ship. And that officer's job is to look out at the weather and see if there are threats out there, to see traffic in the harbor, and I'll see opportunities and convey those to the captain, who is busy, saying, full astern or whatever captains say, and there needs to be somebody else there who's looking out ahead at the weather and blah blah blah. I've thought about that from the time I read that speech, because I thought that audience probably said, what kind of madman is this guy Page? But for those of us who have done it, it's a pretty apt metaphor,
a perfect,
I think. But how do you do it?
Well,
we're not meteorologists.
No, it's a perfect metaphor for what we're talking about, because that's as a counselor, you need to have information that's accurate, information that you can bring to the table in order to present a case. It cannot be emotional, last-minute type thinking. It needs to be rational. So you need, and we talked about the value of surveys, customer surveys, to help run the business successfully. Well, the same thing is true when you're in this position and you're standing next to the captain or in that area. You really are like a periscope or a radar unit that keeps looking 360 degrees around the business at all times to see what's going on with all the various public and constituencies that you deal with, to see if there's likely to be problems, or where things are happening that are good, where things are going that may be a little iffy, and where things really need some attention. Then, as a counselor, it's not your role to go in and tell a CEO, we got a problem over here, you got to get that fixed. He doesn't want to hear that, or she doesn't want to hear that. They want you to come in and you say, we got a problem over here, and here's what I do about it, or here's what you may want to do about it, or something of that nature. That's what counseling is you go to the doctor and you tell them what the problem is. You expect them to tell you, well, that's just what you do. You expect him to give you some kind of an answer, and that's what I think most of us that our jobs are like. So to me, and this is contrary, I'm in dangerous water here in the journalism school saying this, that to me, to achieve this type of value within a corporation or within an organization requires that the person be a broad gauge type person with a wide range of interests. It's nice to be able to write a news release, or to be able to write some ad copy or some slogans, or to write a quick TV blurb, or to write this sort of thing and that. That's all you stuff that when you're at this point, we all did plenty of that at one point in time in our career. But at this point, what's important is the advice and counsel that you can give based on your experience and your knowledge of what's going on. And frequently, that really requires the person be well read, that they know what's going on. I prefer, personally, people that have some form of a liberal arts background, or at least some exposure to it, so that they're used to thinking about things. If they have a degree in philosophy, that's never bothered me, because what you're really looking for are people who can think, who have ideas, who are creative, who are innovative. You don't want somebody who's waiting to hear what you're going to say and writes it down and comes back to your office 10 minutes later and says, well, I think this is what you ought to do. It's crazy. But that scene, I've seen that repeated dozens and dozens of times, where somebody's waiting, and this is even at the most senior levels, waiting for the CEO to make some kind of a statement, whether it's good or bad or whatever. And the minute he says, somebody will say, gee, that sounds like a great idea. It may be the dumbest idea in the world, but the majority of people are not interested in challenging the CEO.
And I think we'll leave it at that on this question, because I can tell you what happens to the senior public relations executive who says, boss, you had a great idea. 9 times out of 10, the boss knows he or she did not have a great idea, is looking for a great idea, and that's probably the last conversation that's ever going to occur between those two, because the boss is going to say, go back and write me a press release, and don't call me, I'll call you.
Don't get caught writing press releases at that level.
Jack, let's get into the flavor of the month, which is a very important flavor. An enduring flavor that sometimes gets lost from time to time. A couple of years ago, you conceived of and edited a book that included chapters by prominent chief executive officers on the subject of integrity, corporate character, whatever you want to call it. And I don't want you to get out of here without talking a little bit about what did you learn from those chapters submitted by CEOs, or what had you hoped to learn and didn't? Either way you want to look at the question. How do you institutionalize integrity? How do you insinuate that into a large organization?
Well, there are several answers to that question, and the first thing I like to say is that Building Trust was written as a project of the Page Society, yes. And it was done really as a response to the headlines denoting week after week or month after month corporate corruption, dishonesty, and really acts of real criminal negligence in several cases. And in a speech that Jeffrey Garten, who was at that time the dean of Yale, made, that he said all that America needs, or business needs, is for a dozen CEOs to speak up about what they're doing in their businesses, and that will begin to quiet this furor of and feeling that all American business is dishonest and crooked. So the Page Society took that to heart and felt that there's one of the things that we were very much for, because the very first principle in the Page Society, which Arthur Page articulated, was tell the truth. And we believed that wholeheartedly. We subscribed to it, and all of our members did that. So it became apparent that this was something that we could do, and that maybe we could help the reputation of American business by taking on this activity. So consequently, because I was at that time in a retired state, though my wife wouldn't necessarily agree with that, I agreed to take on the responsibility of trying to put that book together. It was done with the help, of course, Dave Drobus, who was then the president of the Page Society, and Ron Culp, and many others really contributed to helping to make it happen. One of the things that became clear to me, and we, as it turned out, we wound up with essays from 23 CEOs that were included in the book. Actually, my idea was to have 24, which would be 24, which was twice what Jeffrey Garten had said. But incredibly, at the very last minute, as we were going on the press, one of the best essays and one of the best by one of the CEOs that I happen to personally like the best, called me up and said that our company is going, he was a major shareholder in the company, he said our company is going through an enormously difficult time here, and we're going to reorganize, and I'm not sure where I'm going to be when the reorganization is all over. And so he said, I just don't think that it would be in your best interest to have me in a book that's coming out in 6 months or a year from now, because I'm not sure what my fate's going to be. And so I learned that this was typical of him up front, integrity, honest, here's an alert. Not every CEO would have done that. Some CEOs would have tried to fly under cover, and because they felt that they wanted to be part of this mixed group of outstanding CEOs. I think that the thing that I learned, that there's no question that in a major corporation, and even a minor corporation, if there is such a thing, that the CEO sets the tone. If the CEO's behavior is above board, there's a good chance that that will filter down through the organization. It isn't going to happen automatically, but if there's any question about the behavior of the CEO, the employees are going to look at this with a jaundiced eye. I think one of the best examples is what happened with Boeing and Harry Stonecipher, who was an absolutely terrific CEO, but got caught up in a couple of situations which were not in the best interests of the Boeing company, and he was forced to resign, which he did. His replacement at the first meeting that they had of the senior management team after that meeting called them all together, and the chief lawyer put up on the screen photos of there were two deposed senior people at Boeing. Had their headshots on there, and under the headshots were a whole row of numbers. And the chief general counsel said, "You all know that those are not Social Security numbers. They're under that." And with that, McNerney, who was the new CEO, said, and he said, "That is precisely what will happen to anyone who violates our code of conduct and expectations for truthful behavior." He said, "I want that to be understood right now, and you're hearing it from me. And that was a vivid illustration. I have several friends who work for Boeing, and they told me if there was ever a message delivered, that was really well done. Well, in other companies, it was clear, like in the Eaton company with Cutler, he right after he took over the job, that he was confronted with one of his officers in Asia, the head of their actual Asian operation, who was awarding contracts to a firm that his wife was involved with without putting them out for bids. When he learned that, he was the best operating guy he had in the whole company. Bong, he was fired. He then explained to the employees of the Eaton Corporation that this is not a 3 strikes you're out company. He said 1 strike and you're out. Those kind of messages resonate through the corporations. Other corporations, and Bill Walden from J&J is a good example, have a long history of having a code of ethics or a code of conduct that they go over annually with all of their employees to make sure they understand. So there's a long history of that sort of thing. And consequently, you kind of expect them to have this, and you learn that there is value in having a code of conduct or a set of basic principles. But the thing is, and I think that you agree with this, is that you can have all the code of conducts that you want in your corporation, but when it gets right down to it, it's the individual who makes the difference. If the individual is raised in an environment where they're taught the difference between right and wrong, that's likely to carry over throughout their lives, and they'll have that understanding. And no form of persuasion, one way or the other, will cause them to do other. There are other borderline cases that can be persuaded one way or the other, but basically having a code of conduct is they know that they're violating it, but that doesn't necessarily prevent them from doing it if they see in our culture today that somehow or other it's in their personal best interests. And I think that's one of the things that I learned, that again, this whole sense of greed and the me now generation, that you can have all the teachings, whether they're from the Bible or the Koran or whatever, about proper behavior, but in our culture today, those can be easily ignored if there are people who feel that they can gain somehow personally from this. A person like Marilyn Carlson, who headed up the Carlson companies, said something that struck me as being
in the book.
In the book that was really significant. She says that this is basically a family company, and she's the generation that's running it now. She said that if we expect and want our employees to keep this company alive and preserve it for a we have to treat them like we're running this business for long term. We have to respect their rights, their individual rights, and what their needs are. And if we can do that, then they will help us perpetuate this company. If we don't, in a generation or two, she said, we won't be able to keep this company going.
I think you nailed the answer as I expected. And I will close out by just one last comment about Mr. Page. The things that we call the Page principles that animate the Page Center at Penn State and animate the Page Society and brought it into being, is that his genius was horse sense, believe it or not. And, you know, when principle number 1 is tell the truth, you know, he didn't mean sometime, he meant if it's convenient. White lies are okay. I mean, he could nail it. And another principle, effective public relations, and we can substitute the word corporate governance is 90% doing and 10% talking about it. So as you said, it doesn't make any difference how beautifully worded your code of conduct is if no one pays any attention to it. And that, of course, was the genius of General Johnson and the Johnson & Johnson credo, because it wasn't something on the wall or on the dashboard of a company car. It's a living document that the management not only manages by, but rates itself against those simple propositions, you know, that General Johnson, just like Page, put in that credo that basically said our obligation is to our customers and to caregivers, and that comes first. And basically, at the last thing in the credo, you know, is if we do all of the above diligently, successfully, the share owners will be well taken care of. He did not put the share owners at the top. We have to optimize their income or anything like that. It was all about the customers, employees, and the communities in which the company did business. To do right by all of them, and we'll make out fine on the bottom line. So we'll let it go at that, but keep it simple. Integrity is not something off in the ether. It's what you do every day.
Right.
And who knows what you're doing. Yeah. Thanks, Jack, for sitting in on this.
Well, thank you very much, Ed. Appreciate it.